I've buried more than 300 children, and what terrifies me most isn't the rows of tiny graves lying silent under Minnesota snow. It's the fact that I remember nearly every single name even though no one ever told them to me. My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm 42 years old, and for the past 16 years I've been the caretaker and gravedigger at Willowbrook Children's Cemetery, the last active one left in the entire Great Lakes region. This is where they bring the abandoned newborns, the miscarried fetuses from clinics, the little lives that never lasted long enough to earn a name. People always ask how I can stand the job. I tell them someone has to do it, and these kids deserve a decent place to rest. But the truth is darker. In all those 16 years, I haven't once slept through the night. It started back in the winter of 2009, about 3 months after I took the position. That night I just finished burying a newborn boy. No name, no family, just a hospital slip that read baby boy. Born 320, and deceased 347, respiratory failure. Digging in Minnesota winter is brutal work, it drains you to the bone. I collapsed into bed and fell asleep the second my back hit the mattress. Then I dreamed. But it wasn't my dream. I was a child, maybe 5 years old, running barefoot across the backyard of a pale green clapboard house, while late summer sunlight poured down warm and forgiving. On the porch a woman smiled and called out, "Jackson, come inside for supper, sweetheart." I ran straight into her arms, wrapped in a safety I'd never known in my own life. The scene shifted fast. Elementary school. Acing a spelling test, laughter with friends, then college graduation. My mother, older now, standing beside me, eyes shining with tears. I jolted awake head for something in the morning, soaked in cold sweat. The dream had been so vivid it felt like memory. But it couldn't be. I grew up in an orphanage. I never knew my mother's face. And I sure as hell never graduated from any college. The next morning, while finishing the burial paperwork, I found something I'd missed. Tucked inside the baby's clothing was a small scrap of paper, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "If you get to live, Mommy was going to name you Jackson." I sat there in the freezing office for a long time, the note trembling between my fingers. After that, the dreams never stopped. Every time I buried another child, that night I lived the life they never got to have. A little girl named Emma, I watched her at 12, standing on a recital stage, hands shaking but refusing to drop the violin. A boy named Marcus at 20-something, standing on a California beach with a girl, both of them quiet as the sun bled into the Pacific. Some dreams were so beautiful that when I woke up, the grief of losing them crushed me worse than any nightmare. At first I told myself it was punishment, or some stress-induced breakdown from the job. I cut back on sleep, drank more whiskey, tried to ignore it. But the dreams kept coming, sharper, more detailed. And then the beautiful ones stopped. I started seeing the dark paths. Kids growing up in poverty, dying in violence, or living out long, lonely decades. When I woke, I couldn't decide which was worse, dying as an infant, or surviving only to suffer. By early 2024 a pattern emerged. I buried a baby girl named Lily, transferred from Women's Health Center on the east side of Minneapolis. That night I dreamed her at 7, swinging, alone, in an empty park. A man stood behind her, pushing the swing gently, smiling with kind eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. But something in that smile made my skin crawl. Then Lily's voice, not a child's voice, but a grown woman's, echoed inside my head. He wouldn't let me live. He took my life away. I shot upright in bed, heart hammering, and pulled every recent file. More than 20 of the last 40 cases had come from that same clinic. Paperwork flawless. Unforeseen complications, medically necessary termination, doctor's signature perfect every time. But in every one of those children's dreams, the same face appeared: salt and pepper hair, gold-rimmed glasses, that practiced professional smile. Dr. David Kellerman, Medical Director of Women's Health Center. I'm no detective. I'm just the guy who digs the holes. But the dreams wouldn't let me look away. I started digging through whatever I could find: public records, old articles, forgotten news clips. Kellerman had worked in Wisconsin before his previous clinic shut down over licensing violations. The complication rate at his current place ran higher than average, always explained away with the same tired excuses. 5 nurses had quit in 2 years. None answered when I tried to reach them. I had no real proof, only dreams no court would ever accept. Then the dream shifted again. After burying another boy from the clinic, there was no future to seem. Just the final moment: blinding white lights, the sharp stink of antiseptic, Kellerman's gloved hands in green latex. The child's voice rang clear in my skull: he didn't save me. He chose to let me die. I dug deeper. In an old Wisconsin local paper, I found a buried item: doctor investigated for misuse of stem cell research funds, insufficient evidence for prosecution. Stem cells, fetuses, research. The pieces locked together and left me cold. For weeks after that, every child I buried from that clinic showed me the same place in dreams: the basement of the building, a chilled room lined with medical freezers, Kellerman carefully placing small labeled vials inside. I didn't understand the science. I understood enough. One heavy snow night, I drove to the clinic long after closing. I didn't break in. I just walked the perimeter and found a basement access door left slightly ajar, exactly like in the dream. The cold room door had a keypad lock. In the dream, I'd watched his fingers move across it. I didn't remember the full code, but I tried variations. It clicked open. Inside, row after row of freezers, vials stacked neatly. I didn't take anything. I just photographed every angle, then left. Back home, I sent the pictures anonymously to state health, to newspapers, to every contact I could find. With one line: check the basement at Women's Health Center. Check Dr. Kellerman. A few weeks later, it blew wide open. Kellerman arrested for illegal fetal tissue trafficking and years of falsified medical records. No one ever traced the photos to me. I thought it was over. The next night, I had one final dream. Not a child's life this time, my own future. I saw myself lying in one of the white infant coffins I use every day, lowered into the frozen ground at Willowbrook. No one standing around the grave. A faint needle mark on my arm. I'm writing these words now, sitting in my small office at the cemetery. Lately, I've been getting strange calls, nothing but breathing on the line, then a whisper. You should be careful what you dream. Last night, I saw a black sedan parked outside the gates after dark. No lights. Engine running. If anyone ever reads this, know that I tried to do the right thing. Thomas Brennan was found dead at Willowbrook Cemetery a few days later. Official cause: sudden cardiac arrest. A small needle mark was noted on his arm. No unusual substances detected. The addendum is written by Karen Matthews, a former nurse at Women's Health Center who resigned months before the scandal broke. I don't know whether the things Thomas Brennan dreamed were supernatural. I'd only know that certain things inside that clinic were never fully investigated, and Thomas Brennan knew more than was safe for any man to know. My name is James Carter. I'm the county coroner and records manager for Clatsop County Cemetery, up on the Oregon coast. The job isn't glamorous like the movies make it look. Most days I'm buried in the basement archive, sorting through decades of faded forms, yellowed death certificates, and the damp, mildewed smell that never quite leaves your clothes. That changed in 2023. A new state law passed retroactive DNA testing and exhumation funding for cold cases. The county gave me the first batch 50 graves from 1995 to 2015. Forgotten names, faded file numbers. People no one had asked about in 25 years or more. Routine work, I told myself. Careful disinterment. Sample collection, documentation, reburial. Standard procedure. Then we opened grave number 3. John Doe 447th. No real name, just a number. The cheap pine coffin had rotted through in places. When the lid came off, the skeleton inside wasn't lying in the peaceful supine position we'd placed it in decades earlier. The body had twisted violently to the left, knees drawn tight to the chest, arms extended forward as though shoving against something impossibly heavy. The fingernails what remained on the finger bones were splintered and shattered. 3 cracked ribs on the left side, compression fractures that could only have happened from desperate, repeated pressure against the inside of the coffin lid. Scratches on the underside of the wood, long, deep, frantic gouges, packed with dried blood turned black-brown and soaked into the grain. This person had woken up, inside the coffin. They had been buried alive. I stood there in the rain-soaked trench while the crew stared in stunned silence. My hands shook as I flipped through the file back in the office. Certificate of death, cardiac arrest. Pronounced at Cobb County Hospital to 37 March 14, 1998th, attending physician drive, Elias Marsh. Over the next 3 weeks we opened 47 more graves. The nightmare repeated itself 7 more times. 8 graves total. 8 bodies showing the same unmistakable signs. Contorted limbs, broken nails, fractured ribs and forearms from pounding and clawing. One with a broken mandible, probably from screaming until the jaw snapped. 8 people who had not died when the paperwork said they did. I laid every file across the long table in the records room and stared at the pattern until it burned into my brain. Every single certificate bore the same signature: Elias Marsh, staff physician at Cobb County Hospital from 1995 until his retirement in 2015. He died of lung cancer in 2020 and was buried here in the prestigious family section, not far from the people he had signed away. All 8 deaths occurred during the night shift, between 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock. None had next of kin present. None had visitors. All belonged to societies invisible for homeless. 2 chronic psychiatric patients, 2 inmates with no family contact. The kind of people who vanish and no one files a missing persons report. I started reading the medical literature. Certain toxins can induce profound, temporary paralysis, slowing heart rate and respiration to the point that monitors register flatline. Pufferfish poison, hundreds of times more potent than cyanide, has been documented in cases of apparent zombification in Haiti. Clairvius Narcissus in 1962. Poison, declared dead, buried, then dug up and revived days later. Still conscious but locked in his own body. A precise dose creates a death-like coma while the mind remains awake. Sign the certificate. Send the body to the morgue. Seal the coffin for the mandatory 48-hour hold. When the drug wears off, the victim waits in absolute darkness, under 6 feet of earth, fully aware they are being buried alive. I barely slept after that. I kept seeing them in my head: how long they scratched, how long they gasped in thinning air, how their hearts finally gave out the second time, the real time. I reported it to the county sheriff's office. They opened a case, but Elias Marsh was long dead. No prosecution possible. They said they'd review hospital records, but after 20 years, evidence degrades. There are still more than 200 graves left in the batch. On the night of November 14, 2025, my phone rang at 243. Unknown number. Hello, calm male voice. Cold as coastal fog, Dr. Carter. This is Caleb Marsh. Elias Marsh's son, I know how many graves you're opening. I know what you found. My pulse stopped. I hadn't told anyone the updated number, not even Sarah, my only remaining intern except in passing. 22. It was 22 now. He spoke slowly, almost gently. My father wasn't a murderer. He provided a clean exit for people who had already died inside long before their hearts stopped. They were burdens no one remembered, no one missed. He simply finished the process for them. No pain, no fuss. Silence on my end. You're disturbing what should stay at rest, he continued. Some people are born to be empty spaces. My father made use of those spaces. Now you're creating new ones with your name on them. 178 graves to go. Think carefully. Because if you keep going, I'm not sure how long I'll stay quiet. The line went dead. The next morning, Sarah showed up at my house, pale as bone, holding a printout from the cemetery's security camera. Grainy footage of a figure in a white coat standing among the freshly opened graves just after midnight. Face turned away from the lens. Scattered on the ground beside him, white pills like fallen snow. A small bucket of tissue samples. I think he's back, she whispered. I think he's replacing them with something new. He could keep going. I looked out the window. Rain hammered the glass in heavy sheets, like thousands of fingers tapping out a frantic SOS. I stood at a crossroads. Close the files, bury the evidence, pretend I never saw the scratches, and live. Or keep digging all 200 graves, face the full horror, and face Caleb Marsh, the emergency room physician now working the same night shifts at the same hospital. Quietly inheriting his father's legacy. My hands were shaking. I put on my worn white coat anyway and walked out into the downpour. My phone kept buzzing behind me on the table. I didn't answer. I knew who it was. Today is January 9, 2026. I'm still digging. The rain hasn't stopped. The sounds from beneath the earth seem louder every night, faint. Rhythmic scraping like fingernails on wood that never quite reach the surface. I can't promise I'll save them, but at least they'll hear the crack of splintering pine, the scrape of shovels through wet soil, the sound of someone who hasn't given up. How many woke up in the dark of a sealed coffin? The answer is still down there, waiting for me to bring it into the light. And if it costs me everything, I'll dig until the last one. Because that's the only justice I can give them. The invisible, the forgotten, the victims of a system that looked the other way, and of a fear so deep it let monsters walk among us wearing white coats. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 42 years old, and for the last 8 years I've been the sole caretaker of the old Willowbrook State Psychiatric Hospital Cemetery, a place that stopped accepting new bodies. The day the institution shuttered in 1987. It's not a job most people would choose. I mow acres of overgrown grass, patch rusted chain-link fences, and every few years I receive a court order to exhume a grave when some distant relative finally tracks down a long-lost family member's file after decades of searching. The headstones here are small, gray, and anonymous, no names. No birth dates, no epitaphs. Just patient 3847 or subject 1203 etched in shallow letters that the rain is slowly wearing away. The quiet suited me. Until I opened the first grave. It was a damp March morning last year. The state office sent through an order to relocate grave 1247, a woman whose family in Boston had finally pieced together the paper trail after 60 years. I hired the standard excavation crew, followed protocol to the letter, and stood at the edge of the trench while they pried the rotted pine lid free. Inside lay the delicate skeleton of a woman. Fragments of pale green hospital gowns still clinging to the ribs. I leaned in to make my notes, my gloved fingers brushing the splintered edge of the coffin, and the world disappeared. I wasn't standing in the cemetery anymore. I was strapped to a freezing iron bed in a blinding white room that reeked of bleach and metal. Leather restraints bit into my wrists and ankles. Footsteps echoed on tile. A man in a starched white coat entered, face white behind thick glasses. 200 milligrams today, he said to someone out of sight. I tried to scream that I wasn't crazy, that I was just homeless and had nowhere else to go, but a gag filled my mouth. The needle went in. Fire raced up my arm. My body arched and convulsed while they stood there, clipboards in hand, calmly noting every twitch, every choked gasp. Then darkness swallowed me. When I came back to myself, I was on my knees beside the open grave, soaked in sweat, heart slamming so hard I thought it would crack my sternum. The crew stared down at me with worried faces. "You okay, boss?" one asked. I nodded, stood on shaking legs and lied. I wasn't okay. I had just lived the final minutes of patient 1247, not watched them like a dream, but lived them every second of terror, every jolt of agony, every helpless certainty that no one was coming. I told myself it was shock, overactive imagination, grief leaking in from too many years among the dead. I tried to bury it. 2 weeks later, we relocated grave 784th. The moment my hand touched the coffin wood, it happened again. This time I was a 12-year-old boy named Tommy whose parents had brought him here because he wouldn't listen. I felt the cold metal plates pressed to my temples, smelled my own hair burning as the current tripped through my brain. I heard the doctors chuckle and say, "Excellent response. Noted for the report." Tommy died after the 12th session. His heart simply couldn't take any more. Grave 2156 was worse. Ivan, a Russian immigrant accused of espionage during the Cold War and locked away. Even though his mind was perfectly clear. They dosed him with experimental compounds every day until his memories dissolved. His speech failed. His thoughts frayed into nothing but a hollow shell staring at the ceiling. When I touched his cough, and I felt it all, the slow erasure of a mind. Stroke by stroke, like watching a beautiful painting being scrubbed blank until only milky white remained. And the most horrifying part, some small core of Ivan stayed awake through the entire process, screaming silently inside a body that no longer obeyed him. After that, I couldn't stop. I worked with the state to create a full list, 250 graves in total. They approved funding for systematic exhumation and DNA sampling in the name of identification and possible family reunification. A humanitarian project. For me, it became a curse. Every coffin I opened gave me another life. Every bone I handled turned me, for minutes or sometimes hours, into someone else. After 10 graves, the memories started bleeding into daylight, doctors' faces flashing behind my eyes. The squeak of rubber-soled shoes on waxed floors, the ever-present stink of disinfectant. After 20, I flinched at the sound of keys jingling exactly the way the orderly's key ring sounded when he unlocked isolation room doors in patient 432's memories. After 30, I couldn't wear white shirts anymore. I avoided hospitals entirely, even for routine checkups, because the sight of a white coat sent my pulse racing and my hands shaking. White meant pain. White meant science that wasn't science at all. My wife Sarah watched me unravel. One night I woke screaming, convinced I was strapped down again. "You're not Marcus anymore," she said quietly. "You need to see someone." I couldn't. The thought of sitting in an examination room made my throat close. I knew the memories weren't mine, but they felt like mine. They were becoming mine. By grave 40, I started losing pieces of myself. I forgot my youngest daughter's name. I stared at our wedding photo and took several long seconds to recognize the woman smiling beside me. In their place came strangers I had never met in life, but now knew more intimately than my own blood patient. 923 loved green apples. Patient 1456 had been terrified of the dark since age 3 when her father locked her in a closet. Patient 2087 had a beautiful singing voice and used to lull the others to sleep at night, until they dozed her into permanent silence. And the terrible truth settled in: at least 90% of the people buried here weren't ever mentally ill. They were inconvenient. Homeless people the police cleaned up off the streets. Immigrants suspected during the Red Scare. Unwanted children. Gay men and women whose families paid to have them cured. They were committed for treatment. They were committed to serve as test subjects for experiments too dangerous or too unethical to perform on anyone society considered normal. Unidentified drugs. Electroshock at lethal intensities. Lobotomies for conditions that didn't exist. All meticulously documented in clinical language that reduced human beings to subjects and acceptable mortality rates of 15%. 1974 report noted. Subject 1830 for expired after third dose. Recommend 10% reduction for next cohort. No kind contact remains disposed of per standard protocol. Disposed of. Like medical waste. I went public. I contacted reporters, human rights organizations, the district attorney's office. I handed over the hospital archives I'd found in the old storage wing, pages and pages of cold, precise records detailing every injection, every voltage, every deliberate selection of patients who could be spared because no one would come looking. The story caught fire. Calls for investigation. Demands for restitution. But the crimes were half a century old. The doctors were dead. The hospital had been padlocked for decades. There would be no trials. Only 250 silent graves and one groundskeeper quietly losing his mind. After the 50th exhumation, I could no longer separate my own past from theirs. Is the childhood memory of riding my bike down Maple Street mine, or does it belong to patient 234? Did I marry Sarah on that rainy June afternoon? Or was that patient 1876 before her husband committed her for postpartum depression? Did I hold my daughter for the first time in the delivery room? Or was that patient 567 remembering the moment they tore her newborn away and told her the baby had died, when in reality they simply placed the child for adoption? Last night I stood in the kitchen making dinner and began speaking fluent Russian. Full sentences, perfect accent. Sarah stared at me in horror. What are you saying? I didn't know. I've never studied Russian. But Ivan patient 2156 did. And now I do too. This morning I couldn't remember my email password. But I can still smell the exact mildew and bleach odor of isolation room 7, where patient 892 was kept in total darkness for 2 months to study sensory deprivation effects. I don't recall Sarah's birthday anymore. But I remember the exact sound the electroshock machine made right before the current hit, and the way my Simone's body arched and spazzed. I don't remember the route to our house. But I remember the real names of 50 people who never had them carved on their stones. The worst part is the fear. I flinch at electricity now. Can't touch light switches. Can't stand near outlets. White coats make my heart race. The jangle of keys makes me want to hide. I am becoming a patient of Willowbrook State Psychiatric Hospital even though it closed 40 years ago. Even though I was born after it shut down. Even though I was never committed. Memories don't care about calendars. They live in bone. And when I touch bone, they pour into me like water into an empty vessel. There are still 200 graves left. The state keeps pressing me to finish the project to identify every victim, issue the formal apologies, write the restitution checks, and close the chapter. But if I open 200 more coffins, I will carry the memories of 250 dead. If 50 have already erased most of who I was, what will 250 leave behind? Will there be anything left of Marcus Webb? Or will I become a living archive, a walking mausoleum filled with the pain, the stolen years, the smothered dreams of people society decided were expendable. Yet if I stop, who will speak for them? Who will remember that Tommy loved baseball, that Anna sang like an angel, that Ivan dreamed of opening a little bakery? The medical files list only numbers. The headstones carry only numbers. Only I threw whatever strange gift or punishment. This is no, they were real people with favorite foods, childhood fears, private hopes that work rushed under the wheels of fraudulent science. So tonight I will walk back to the cemetery. I will open grave 51, then 52, then 53. I will keep going until there is no more Marcus Webb, only a composite of 250 souls who were denied, erased, and buried under anonymous numbers. And maybe that's the right thing. Maybe that's the only way they get to live again. Not in the world they lost, but inside me, through me, in every word I speak to expose what was done here. If you carry the memories of 50 dead, are you still yourself? I don't know. But I know this: sometimes the price of giving the voiceless a final voice is to lose your own. And I'm willing to pay it. My name is Ray Kowalski. I'm 38 years old. And for the past 12 years, I've made my living as a contract grave digger for development companies that need to clear old cemeteries before they break ground. It's not a profession most people talk about. But in the old Pennsylvania coal country where I live, it's steady work. When a builder wants to put up a mall, an industrial park, or a new stretch of highway over ground that used to be a burying ground, they hire guys like me to exhume carefully, try to identify remains where possible, and relocate the bones to a modern cemetery according to state law. I've dug more than 2,000 graves across 3 states. I've seen everything: rotted caskets collapsing under their own weight, animal nests in rib cages, tiny child skeletons that force you to stop and breathe deep before you can keep going. But nothing prepared me for what I found last year. Someone had turned an abandoned 19th century graveyard into a private dumping ground for murder victims over the course of 3 decades, and no one had noticed. The contract came from Hillcrest Development in April of last year. They had purchased 15 acres on the outskirts of Ashford, a ghost of a coal town that dried up in the 1950s. On the property sat St. Michael's Cemetery, established in 1840, mostly filled with miners, their wives, and their kids. The place stopped taking burials around 1920 when the last shaft closed. Then after that it was forgotten, overgrown with blackberry brambles. Headstones toppled or so covered in lichen you couldn't read the names. My job was to excavate the 300 marked graves shown on the old plat maps, collect DNA samples where tissue remained, and transfer the remains to a county-maintained cemetery. They offered $180 per grave, $54,000 total. Enough to pay off my credit cards and fix the leaking roof on my house. I signed the papers the same day, hired 2 reliable helpers. And we started the first week of May. For the first 2 months everything went textbook. 90 graves down, mostly what you'd expect. Pine boxes long since turned to mulch, 19th century remains, the occasional lucky find old coins. A wedding band, a small glass medicine vial from the patent medicine days. I photographed everything, logged every detail. Transferred the bones to new containers. Then we reached grave 94. It wasn't marked with a headstone. It was only listed on the antique map as unmarked grave 12. We dug to the GPS coordinates, and at 6 feet deeper than the usual 19th century depth my shovel hit solid wood. I cleared the dirt carefully and uncovered a casket that looked almost new. Not the hand-hewn oak of the old graves, this was industrial plywood. The kind that became common in the 1970s and 80s. Something twisted in my gut. Why does it look so fresh? Jimmy asked. I didn't answer. We eased the lid off. Inside was the partially mummified body of a white male, dressed in faded blue jeans, a Rock Band t-shirt, and Reebok sneakers I recognized from the 1990 seconds. Decomposition was advanced because of the damp soil, but the clothing and accessories held up. In the front pocket of the jeans I found a brown leather wallet. Inside, a plastic driver's license, badly faded, and a Visa card expired in 1998. The name was Robert Chen. Born 1971, address in Ohio. We stood in the hole in total silence. This wasn't a 150-year-old miner. This was someone who had died or been killed within the last 30 years, buried in an old graveyard and disguised as an unmarked historical grave. I told the guys to cover it back up without touching anything else. I called Hillcrest. They said they'd contact their attorney and the police. The cops arrived that afternoon and seized the entire casket as evidence. They ran Robert Chen's name and confirmed he had gone missing in 1998 while driving from Ohio to Pennsylvania for a tech conference. Family filed a report, but no leads ever surfaced. Now, 25 years later, he'd been found in a forgotten cemetery, hidden among the real dead of the previous century. They told me to report any other anomalies immediately and posted an officer to watch the site for a few days. When nothing else turned up, they pulled the detail and chalked it up to a possible one-off Fay 1998 murder. The killer choosing the abandoned graveyard because he knew no one would ever disturb it. I didn't buy it. Over the next 2 months, every 10 graves or so, we hit another one. Grave 112, a woman in early 2000 seconds athletic wear. Honda keys and the gym membership card expired 2003 in her pocket. Jennifer Martinez, missing from West Virginia in 2003. Grave 137, young black man in a hoodie and khakis. Nokia flip phone and a Penn State student ID from 2001. Marcus Thompson, vanished on his way home for summer break. Grave 158. Middle-aged man in a business suit, still wearing a Saka watch and wedding band. Business cards from a Pittsburgh finance firm. David Kolsky. No relation, disappeared in 1995 en route to meet a client. I built an Excel sheet. By grave 210 I'd found 18 modern burials. Roughly 1 fake grave for every 12 legitimate ones. All buried twice as deep as the old graves, 6 to 7 feet instead of 4. None with markers or only vague notations on antique maps. All missing persons from 1990 to 2008. Nothing after 2008. Maybe the killers stopped, moved away, or died. This time the police launched a full investigation. The FBI came in because the victims crossed state lines. They locked down the site, brought in forensic teams and cadaver dogs, started a systematic dig. They told me to keep working, but under FBI supervision. The investigation revealed a chilling pattern. Every victim had disappeared along Interstate 80 or one of its feeder roads, within a 100-mile radius of St. Michael's Cemetery. All were traveling alone, no passengers, no companions. Cars found abandoned at rest areas or on shoulders, keys in the ignition, no signs of struggle. As though the drivers had willingly stepped out, followed someone, and never returned. The profile pointed to one or more organized killers operating for nearly 2 decades, using the abandoned graveyard as a perfect long-term disposal site, knowing no one would ever dig up century-old graves. Until a developer bought the land and hired someone like me. Then, 3 weeks ago, with 267 graves excavated and the contract almost finished, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just slipped in during the early morning hours. Inside, a single 4x6 color print. The photo showed me standing in an open grave. Shovel raised me in my brown leather jacket and green hard hat, taken with a telephoto lens from the pine woods at the cemetery's edge, an area the FBI hadn't yet searched. Written beneath the image in neat black ink, grave 301 is ready. Stop digging. My blood turned to ice. Grave 301st. I checked every map. The original 1918 plat, The copy Hillcrest provided. My own GPS updated version. St. Michael Cemetery had exactly 300 recorded graves. No 301 existed. I showed the letter to Detective Ramirez. He studied it for a long time, then said, "We'll put extra security on you. And we need your help one last thing. Can you find grave 301? I told him I wasn't sure it wasn't on any map. But he believed that if someone mentioned it, the grave existed somewhere. Maybe an unmarked dig near the boundary, or just outside the official perimeter. He wanted me to help the FBI grid search the entire property with ground-penetrating radar. We scanned every square foot over 2 days. And we found it. In the northeast corner, behind a line of old-growth pines where the ground slopes toward a dry creek bed, a patch of recently disturbed soil. Soft, no vegetation yet. No marker. No sign. Just a rectangle 2 meters by 1 meter. GPS showed a rectangular void at 7 feet coffin-shaped. Ramirez called in the forensic team. They dug slowly, screening every shovel FUL. It took 3 hours to reach the depth. The casket was brand new. Cheap builder-grade pine, still smelling faintly of sawdust. Ramirez signaled everyone back, then carefully lifted the lid. The box was empty. In the center of the satin lining lay a single sheet of white paper. Same neat handwriting, height 5'10". Shoe size 10.5, weight approx. 180 pounds. Perfect fit. I'm 5'10". I wear size 10.5 shoes. I weigh 179 pounds. Someone had watched me closely enough to know my exact measurements. Someone had dug this grave 301. A number that never existed in any official record but clearly meant something to them and reserved it for me. The message couldn't have been clearer. Stop, or this is where you end up. The FBI moved me into temporary witness protection. Safe apartment, round-the-clock guards, no return to the site. They finished the last 33 graves without me and found for more modern burials, bringing the total to 22 victims. They processed the letter, the photograph, and the note in the empty coffin for prints and DNA. Nothing clean. They checked every security camera within 5 miles of the cemetery and my house. No suspicious vehicles. They interviewed old miners, forest rangers, hunters. No one knew anything. The writer was a ghost, appeared just long enough to threaten me, then vanished without a trace. Detective Ramirez told me there are 2 possibilities: the original killer is still alive and watching, or there's an accomplice, someone who didn't kill, but knows the secret and wants it protected. He thinks the second is more likely. If the primary killer operated from 1990 to 2008, he'd be in his 50s or 60s now. Digging a 7-foot grave takes strength an older man might not have. The note writer could be a spouse, child, or friend who learned the truth and decided to keep it buried. I'm sitting in this unfamiliar apartment now, staring out at a street I don't recognize, thinking about the 22 people I brought back to the light. Ordinary people, students, office workers, engineers, teachers who set out for short trips and never made it home. Their families spent decades in limbo, searching, hoping, never knowing. Now, because of my work, they have answers. Not the answers they wanted, but closure. An end to the not knowing. That has to mean something, doesn't it? I don't know if I'll go back to this line of work, because now I understand that behind every grave isn't just history. Sometimes it's a secret. Sometimes it's a crime. Sometimes it's someone who will do anything to stay hidden. And when I dig them up, I'm not only exposing the dead, I'm dragging the living into the light, and some of them are willing to kill to stay in the dark. Grave 301 is still out there, empty. Ramirez says they'll fill it in once the investigation closes. But right now they're leaving it open like bait in case the writer comes back. I keep telling myself I'm safe, that the FBI will find whoever sent the note. That it's just words on paper. But at night I dream I'm lying in that empty box, hearing the lid nailed shut, feeling the first shovelfuls of earth thud onto the wood above my face, listening to footsteps fade away on the surface while the weight settles in heavier and heavier, until the darkness is absolute. When an old graveyard hides modern murder, the question isn't only how many are buried there, it's who comes next. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 35, and for 7 years I've managed burial records at Oakland Hills Cemetery, a quiet sprawl of headstones on the outskirts of Newark, New Jersey. The job is solitary. Most days I sit alone in the ground floor office of the administration building, surrounded by towering stacks of yellowed files, breathing in the sour mildew that rises from rusted metal cabinets, listening to the wheezing startup of a 2005 desktop that sounds like it's dying every morning. I inherited the position from Walter Brennan, who held it for 40 years before retiring in 2018. He was a myth among the groundskeepers, never took a day off, practically lived in the office from first light until the last street lamp flickered on, even on weekends. People said he knew every grave the way a man knows the creases in his own hand. In 2023, the state finally released funding to digitize the public cemetery records from 1950 to 1980th. I was given the assignment, a $25,000 stipend, and 2 years to finish. I expected nothing more than tedious scanning, file naming, and uploading. Then came the rainy Friday afternoon in February of last year, when the past reached up and pulled me under. I descended to the old basement archive, a forgotten level that held records from the 1940s and 50s untouched for decades. The air was dense with the stench of rotting paper and dust. Long dead fluorescent tubes left me working by the narrow beam of an LED flashlight, while I wrestled a heavy steel cabinet aside to reach the boxes behind it. Something clattered inside the wall, like an object shifting and falling. I swept the beam across the concrete. Nothing visible. But when I tapped the wall, the sound rang hollow. Curiosity won. I took a small hammer from the maintenance kit and struck. Thin plaster cracked and peeled away, exposing a deliberately bricked-in cavity. Inside lay a thick black leather-bound ledger, A for size, and a small tin box. I lifted them out, brushed away the dust of half a century. The ledger was heavy, authoritative. The opening page, written in elegant, slanted blue ink from another era supplemental records, not for official filing custodian-in-chief only. March 12, 1951. Walter Brennan, head groundskeeper. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Walter Brennan had written this. I turned the pages. Meticulous handwritten tables, date, name or description, origin, payment, burial location notes. 89 unofficial burials between 1951 and 1982. Everyone listed as John Doe or Jane Doe, homeless brought in from Newark General Hospital, psychiatric patients from city shelters, unclaimed prisoners. Payments came in cash or anonymous checks, $50 to $150. Burial locations were recorded as gaps between legal plots, the narrow strips of earth between two legitimate graves, spaces that never appeared on official maps, places where only grass was supposed to grow. I counted quickly. 89 over 31 years. Then a notes column turned my stomach. Page 47, 1967. 9/23, 1967. Jane Doe, 28. Female approx. 35, Newark City Shelter. STILLBREATHINGWEIKLYAEBURIL. Dr. Hendricks, confirmed no hope of recovery. Proceed. I read it twice, hands shaking. Still breathing weakly at burial. Page 52. 1916 PU. PILLARYR REFL EXST ILLPRESENT. I went back through the ledger and tallied them. 23 entries carried similar observations. Nearly 1 in 4 people issued legal death certificates, declared beyond saving, yet still showing faint signs of life when the coffin lid closed. And buried anyway. Because it was cheaper. Because no one would miss them. Because no one would ever ask. I sank to the cold concrete floor, the ledger trembling in my lap. The tin box beside me held receipts, faded checks, and one black and white photograph. 3 men standing in front of the cemetery gates, smiling for the camera, on the reverse. In the same precise hand: W. Brennan, Dr. F. Hendricks, Chief Morrison, 1952. Groundskeeper. Doctor. Police Chief. 3 men who held the power to decide who lived and who was erased. I carried the ledger upstairs, locked my office, and photographed every page. The next morning, I met Maria Delgado, an investigative reporter for the Newark Star-Ledger, at a diner 3 miles away. She read in silence, her face growing paler with each page. "This is evidence of crimes," she said. "Burying people alive." Names of the doctor. The chief. I told her publish it. The story broke on March 15, 2025, front page: Oakland Hills Cemetery 89 and claimed dead buried illegally. 23 suspected buried alive. Photos of the ledger. The 1952 snapshot, my interview. The city erupted. Human rights organizations demanded full investigations. Families of missing persons from the 50s through the 80s began calling the paper. The Essex County Prosecutor's Office opened a case. 3 days later, Maria phoned, voice strained. They forced a retraction. The lawyers say the ledger is only handwritten notes. No forensic proof, no DNA, no exhumations. I argued. There are names, receipts, photographs. She exhaled. Everyone involved is dead. Hendricks in 2001, Morrison in 2010, Brennan in 2020. No one left to prosecute. Their families' attorneys are threatening defamation suits against the paper. That night the article disappeared from the website. In its place, a brief notice that the story had been removed pending verification of sources. Maria stopped taking my calls. The following morning I opened my personal safe, the one whose combination only I knew. Empty. The black ledger and tin box were gone. Thankfully I still had the photographs on my phone. I backed them up to the cloud and sent copies to 3 people I trusted. But the dread clung to me like damp earth. That evening in my small apartment in Belleville, the phone rang at 11:12 p.m. Caller ID displayed the cemetery office landline. 973 555 147. The building had been locked since 5. I answered. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then a low, rasping voice, cracked and slow like an old reel-to-reel tape. "Kid, you shouldn't have read things that weren't meant for you." Cold sweat broke across my back. "Who is this?" The voice answered, "Some secrets belong in the ground. The ledger has returned to its proper place." The line went dead. I called back. It rang endlessly. I spent the night on the sofa, kitchen knife in my fist, listening to every creak the building made. At 6:30 the next morning I unlocked the office. Everything appeared untouched. Then I opened the center drawer of my desk. The black ledger rested inside, exactly where it belonged, as though it had never left. I flipped to the final entry, the last case from 1982. A new line had appeared in fresh black ink. Handwriting unsteady: Case 90, current records manager, schedule, burial date blank. Beneath it, a small smear of ink, as though the pen had only just been lifted. I called the police. 2 officers arrived, took my statement, reviewed the cameras. At 11:03 The previous night a figure in a black hoodie had entered through the side gate, spent 12 minutes inside the building, then left. Face hidden. Detective Mitchell told me plainly, "Get out of here for a while. Stay somewhere safe." I took emergency leave, packed a bag, and made plans to stay with my sister in Pennsylvania. But before I left, I returned to the cemetery at dusk. I carried a shovel, flashlight, and the 1967 plot map. I chose the first location, section E, row 8, the narrow gap between plots 12 and 13. Jane Doe 28, the one noted as still breathing weakly in 1967. The soil gave easily. 15 minutes in, the shovel struck rotted wood. A small, cheap casket decayed after 60 years. I didn't open it. I was qualified, but I knew the ledger had told the truth. Someone lay there, nameless on every official record. I photographed the site, recorded the GPS coordinates, and began refiling the hole. Then I heard footsteps. I killed the light and froze. A flashlight beam moved slowly across the graves, paused, swung toward me as though drawn by scent. I snapped my own light into the figure's face and ran. Behind me came heavy, wheezing pursuit, old lungs struggling for air. I burst through the side gate, threw myself into the car, and drove. In the rear-view mirror the figure stood motionless in the middle of the lane, watching, before it melted back into the cemetery as shadows. I drove straight through to Pennsylvania without stopping. 2 weeks later I'm still here. Detective Mitchell called the investigation as moving slowly. Fingerprints on the ledger belong only to me and a few faint, decades-old traces. Maria finally contacted me again. She apologized for the retraction, said she still believes every word, but the paper refuses to let her continue. She warned me quietly, if they can silence a major newspaper, they can do the same to anyone else. Today is January 9, 2026. I'm still in Pennsylvania, but I know I can't hide forever. Work will call. Life will demand I return. Every night I see that unfinished line in my mind, case 90. The date remains blank. Perhaps they're waiting for me to go home. Waiting for my guard to drop. I still have the photographs of the black ledger. The coordinates of secret graves. Evidence of a 30-year system that turned the forgotten into quiet profit and, sometimes, into the victims of the coldest form of murder, burying the living because they were judged not worth saving. I don't know when the ledger will receive its final entry, but I know this Oakland Hills cemetery is still open for business. The gaps between the graves are still there, and the black ledger is almost certainly waiting for the next number. Can records buried in the earth keep writing themselves? I believe they can. And the next lie may already be inked, only waiting for the day it is filled.